it just seemed like the time we should have a little chat about the American Revolution. Because we still have problems. We always will have problems, but we need to remember how blessed we are. That's really what I wanted to talk to you about. And we have three incredible guests that are going to come at this revolution from different angles, and you're about to learn so much on the show. But I just want to remind you of this. Revolution, the toppling of a government. It's not a new concept. It's happened since man started to establish governments on Earth. People get sick of it, they topple it. It almost always ends bad. Why? Why does it almost always end bad? And you can see this today. You'll have an evil government, an evil tyrant, something horrible. And we'll think, well, let's just get rid of it. And we do several times. We participated in it several times. And you think, well, it can't possibly get worse. We got rid of this guy. But it's almost always worse. Why is that? Well, it's because usually the people with the most power, the most guns, they're the ones who fill up the power vacuum when a government has been toppled. So you may kick out a tyrant, an evil tyrant, a bad man, but the guy who is the most powerful, who's willing to shoot the most people in the face or stab them if we're going back to ancient history, he's the one who ends up taking over. And then you went from one tyrant to an even worse tyrant / warlord. But that didn't happen here. We are one of the few countries you can ever name in human history where we had a revolution. We tossed off a tyrant, and the men who led our revolution, they absolutely could have taken power, established some sort of a monarchy, an oligarchy here. But the men, wealthy, powerful men who led our revolution, they wanted something different. You, me, we exist here 249 years later with something different because our revolution was about casting off tyranny and making sure we never replace it. They didn't want to replace the King of England when they tossed him out. They wanted the American people to be free. And I wanted to nail down on this really quickly before we get to our guests. Land of the free. Free. America's free. Don't let that word mean nothing. It's become so watered down now that we don't even really understand what we're talking about. To be free means that you, the citizen, you can criticize your government openly, out in the public square without fear. It means you, the American citizen, you are allowed to be armed because it doesn't matter whether or not the government wants you to be armed. You should be armed because you, the individual, you are sovereign and you have every right to protect yourself, your family, and your property. Now, these concepts may seem, oh yeah, I get that. You don't understand how unique that is in human history. In fact, how unique it is in the world today. As we speak right now, that's not how most people live on this planet, but you do, and I do. And we have that blessing because of the revolution, not just because we fought a war with the most powerful country on earth and won, because we fought a war with the most powerful country on earth, won, and created a free society. Just the state system itself, the federal government, limited. That's really what most of the Constitution is about, putting up walls, fences around the federal government. You're only allowed to do this and only allowed to do that. Anything else? The states get to govern themselves. The people deserve to be free. The people deserve to choose what they want. You, me, our children, they get to enjoy that country. And that is so incredibly unique in human history. That's not usually how it goes. We are blessed. Our revolution is rare. It's the rarest thing in the world, and we're just so blessed by God to be here. I hope you realize that. The American Revolution, we all think we kind of know the high points, and maybe we do know the high points, but there's so much more to it. So we thought it'd be a good time to bring in some experts, guys who've written books on it, dissected it. I mean, even things like "Give me liberty" or "Give me death." Everyone knows that speech, but what was that all about? What was happening at the time? Well, I think we should dig into that, don't you? Let's do that next. I love feeling good all the time. It's very rare, isn't it, to feel energized, in a good mood. And especially today, we kind of sometimes we get down or we need an afternoon cup of coffee and we don't know why. Well, let me explain why. You're not getting everything you need in your body. So where do you go? You want to go to the doctor? Down to the local clinic? Why don't you try natural solutions? That's what's changed my life. Chalk has changed my entire life. It's changed my work, changed my home life. My mood is better. What do? Well, it's pretty easy. I wake up, eat some breakfast tacos. My wife gets mad, and then I wash it down with a male vitality stack from Chalk. Has me feeling good every single day. No more random bouts of, oh, I'm kind of sad. No more running out of energy. They have female vitality stacks. They have Chalk lit powder. If you're one of those workout freaks, they have a pre-workout, all natural, called Chad mode. Chalk is your first stop, not your last stop, when you want something improved in your life. Chalk.com/JesseTV. All right, so how do you teach history? How should you teach history, your nation's history? Certain countries, like ours, in certain sectors, teach their kids that the country sucks. Certain countries go completely the opposite way, maybe over the top, maybe too over the top, depending on who you are. Countries like Japan. Let's ask someone who actually teaches it instead of me. Joining me now, the great Dr. Wilfred McClay of the amazing Hillsdale College, which is near and dear to my heart, and author of the book that I would recommend if you're looking to learn about this, Land of Hope. All right, Doctor, you have the awesome responsibility of teaching young minds about America, American history, the Revolution. How do you do it? What's the right way?
Well, there's a lot of things. I think the first and foremost thing is you have to think of yourself as being involved in helping to form citizens, good citizens, people who are going to be informed, effective, judicious, non-crazy, uh, able to function as citizens in a democratic Republican society, and that doesn't just happen by osmosis. They have to learn certain things. They have to learn the principles of our way of life, of our government. So that's what I see as the foremost responsibility. But I also think you ought to teach history as something that is part of their heritage, that it's an inheritance, and it's a good inheritance. It's not an inheritance of disease or debt. It's or not that exclusively. It's an inheritance of freedom, the freedom that people have fought for, died for, sacrificed for, and given their all to perpetuate. So there should be an attitude of gratitude, if I may put it that way. And I definitely am not of the school of thought, the first kind of historian that you cited in your intro. I think it's an extraordinary country, and they should know it. And they should be grateful for that, and they should take up the task of perpetuating it.
Amen. No, I agree 100%. I love that line. I'm preparing citizens. Do you find, now I should preface this by saying I understand Hillsdale College is going to get a certain kind of student, a student that's probably more ready to hear from someone like you than Berkeley or something like that. But do you find the students you get ready for that message? Have they been taught something different? Do they soak it up like a sponge? Do they push back? How's that go?
Well, look, I feel very privileged to be at Hillsdale. I've only been here for 4 years, and actually, if somebody my age would, normal people would be thinking about retirement. My idea of retirement is being carried out in a pine box. I love what I do too much, and I think it's too important I have no interest in playing golf or shuffleboard. So, what am I going to, but seriously, it's a privilege to teach at Hillsdale, but I've only done it for the last 4 years. The other 36, 7 years I've been teaching, I've been at other places, some of which were very good, or I had very good experiences, very good students. I had great students at the University of Oklahoma, for example, where I was for 8 years, and before coming to Hillsdale. And I have great affection for Hillsdale, for Oklahoma. Uh, but I would have to say, unlike Hillsdale students, you don't know what you're going to be getting in terms of having a kind of eager, hungry predisposition to know more about a country that they already love, and they want to know more about why they should love it. You have to do some persuasion, and students come in with very bad, mistaken ideas. For example, I think other places that I've taught, the assumption that students have coming into the class is that the United States invented slavery, and really only the southern states. And so there's a unique kind of burden of guilt that we bear. And that's absolute rubbish. We did not invent slavery. Slavery has been universal. It's almost been more the rule than the exception in the history of humankind. We did something extraordinary beginning around the 18th century. Is we and the Anglo-American world started to move towards abolition of slavery. And the United States of America, had the first anti-slavery, abolitionist society in the world. So we were guilty of this institution that the human race has largely outgrown, although there's a lot of it going on today in the world. That's another subject. But we have led the way in dealing with our faults. And I think that's one of the things that kids need to get, is an understanding. You don't have to claim perfection for the United States of America to be proud of it, and to be proud of our founding fathers, who were fallible leaders. If you're looking for infallibility in your heroes, you're never going to find any heroes, because there aren't any infallible men in the world. But what is great about us is not only that we have a great beginning founded on great principles, but we've been trying and trying decade after decade, century after century, to live up to those ideals that are foundational to us. And I think accentuating the negative, especially as we come up on our 250th anniversary, seems to me very wrong-handed. But you're right.
It does.
The America Sucks contingents out there in full force, particularly in higher education, which is really very sad.
No, it is, and I'll tell you, Doctor, I'm a history freak. Obviously, I'm just a fan. I'm not a historian like you are, but I'm a history freak. I just hoover it up. I read, I watch it all, and it has been very difficult for me as a history fan to watch what has happened to the subject of history. I actually argue repeatedly it's one of the most damaging thing the America haters have taken over. You can't just download a podcast now without getting some sort of America Sucks version of history, a new book. It's some America Sucks version of history, and I can't stand it. It's awful.
Well, and the funny thing about it is that they are so moralistic, and you can't talk about just in an objective way about slavery, how it was different at different times and in different regions, and just understand it as a human institution of a particular time and place. You have to deliver a sermon on the subject. And that gets in the way of historical understanding. History is not a morality play. Even though I also insist that we have much to be very, very proud of about our history. And but another reason to teach history, American history, to our students is that this is something, is their heritage. It's a precious thing. And to teach it wrongly, to teach it as a source of shame, is really to deprive them. It's like depriving somebody of their inheritance. Uh, and I think that's morally offensive, and also a big waste of time that could be better spent inculcating them with a sense of pride. You know, one of the things when I was working on the book, I had a man I didn't know very well, a very high-end lawyer in New York, white shoe law firm, who wanted to meet me, and we had dinner together. And he made this statement that absolutely blew me away. It's a simple statement. Many of your listeners will say, well, duh, but I had not thought about this. He said, look, I think that when you teach young people that they live under a bad regime, it's damaging to their souls. And wow, that just hit me very hard, that the way you teach history is very important as an act of moral formation in the young. And if you form them in the wrong way, it can be damaging to them in permanent and very serious ways, and have consequences for the nation too. But have consequences for them in their individual lives. So ever since then, and I had informed my composition of the book. But by the way, may I say, we have a new second edition of Land of Hope coming out, and it's going to be great. We have 3 times as many maps and images, all kinds of features that teachers are going to love. It's a kind of non-textbook textbook. That's what I strove to do. And everybody tells me they love reading it. So, you know, who am I to object? But I think they're going to love the 2.0,
No doubt.
Land of Hope 2.0 better.
Oh, I'm gonna so nerd out on this book. I can't wait to get my hands on this book.
Well, we'll send you a
did
copy
call
as soon as I get it.
A land of. Oh,
Oh,
I'm
that's
all over it. I'm all over it. Why'd you call it a land of hope?
Because, well, and that was the first thing I did before I started writing it. I thought to myself, you know, the title is really going to be very important. And and it came to me very quickly. And for this reason, that it America is a place, it's an idea, but it's also a sort of spiritual concept. And in this sense, that it's part of our national makeup, a part of our national creed. We're made up of many people. We are a nation of immigrants in the sense that the entire Western Hemisphere was populated by people who'd come from somewhere else. Even the indigenous peoples had come from somewhere else. They come from Asia. And but all the people who came westward, with the very important exception of enslaved Africans, came in search of a better life. They wanted to take a chance on a new place, a new location, a second chance at life, not to be condemned to live out their lives in the conditions into which they were born, whether they were Polish peasants or what have you. That America was a chance at a second chance. And you know, it's a land of hope, in that the hopes of improvement of one's life, and also the hope, because we've always been a very religious people, a hope that, well, it's the original Puritans thought that they could establish a true church in a new Zion, the new world. So in some ways, we are the most, I say we're the most aspirational people on earth, probably the most aspirational people that have ever been. And that's why Land of Hope seemed to me to be the perfect title, because hope is aspiration. Hope is that substance towards which we yearn, the things for which may be material, they may be spiritual. All of these things are part of our makeup.
Doctor, you make me want to go sit in your class. Not that I could ever get into Hillsdale, but you make me want to go sit in your class. A Land of Hope, I will be picking it up. Thank you, sir, very much. That guy's awesome. Gosh, I'm just so geeking out on the revolution. Anyway, we have more with another expert next. I love chips. Did you know that? I friggin' love chips. And chips are terrible for you. It's just the truth. I've loved them since I was a kid. My parents had to limit how many little chips I could get in a little bowl. Guess what? I don't have to limit my chips anymore because of Massa chips. I was told about Massa chips by a friend. Only 3 ingredients, no seed oils and that kind of stuff. And I'll be honest with you, I immediately rolled my eyes. Oh, good. Another disgusting chip that's going to be gross. They're incredible. My youngest son, he probably eats worse than I do. I can't keep bags of Massa chips in the house. He steals them and takes them up to his room and just devours them. Greatest freaking thing I have ever discovered in my life. If you are a chip lover and you don't want all the extra garbage and you want something delicious, there you go. massachips.com/JesseTV saves you a pile of money. Go enjoy. We all make a mistake with history. I shouldn't say we all. I make a mistake with history where we look back, especially on something like the American Revolution, the early days of this country, and we think to ourselves, well, I mean, they didn't have the criminal government we have now. They did FBI and all this crimes and cover-ups and lies, that this is a new phenomenon, but there's nothing new under the sun, as the good book says. Joining me now is somebody who knows just a little bit more about this than I do, Donald Jeffries, author of the book Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics from 1976 to 1963. Donald, are you telling me there were cover-ups and crimes back in the 1700s? That doesn't sound right.
As you said, there's nothing new under the sun. Hard to believe, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. What happened back then?
Well, I think, that book covers a whole lot of territory. It does start from the American Revolution on, but I think, that I think the first thing to remember is to realize we kind of we have a unique situation here where we have a country that was formed, and at this point in history, the people that rule this country now want nothing to do with the founders of the country or the documents, for that matter. So they basically ignore the founding. In fact, when I was researching that book, I watched a lot of movies. I watched a lot of movies anyhow, and I've found to my astonishment that Hollywood pretty much has always ignored the founding fathers. There's never been a biography about George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, any of them, which is odd given the patriotic films they had back in the day. And in fact, when Mel Gibson made the movie The Patriot, I think in the late 90s, I don't know if you remember, but it caused a great deal of controversy. And it was just a straightforward account of one man's fight against the British. You think that would be heralded as a patriotic film? No, I mean, all the usual suspects, you raked it over the coals. How can you make this film? This is full of hate and everything. And so it's very unique because we still have leaders that swear to uphold the Constitution, and I don't think very many of them believe in the Constitution. So I don't know if there are other countries like this, but we have a unique situation here where our founding documents and our founders, which of course are increasingly vilified now. When I was a kid, they were still heroes largely. None are heroes now except Alexander Hamilton, who's been transformed into a Black Broadway star because he was the banker's favorite founder and invented debt. So of course he would be welcome today, but none of the others, especially Thomas Jefferson, my favorite, has been really chastised and unfairly treated. And he wrote the timeless Declaration of Independence and was probably the first classical liberal, which I based my politics on.
Where did he learn his politics?
Well, I think he's certainly inspired by John Locke and people like that. But he had an open mind. He was one of the free thinkers, of his day, and he was a product of the Enlightenment. Of course, he came along later in the Enlightenment, but probably you could argue that the American Revolution was maybe one of the greatest accomplishments of the Renaissance. It came a little later, but these were free thinkers who no longer thought we had to have royalty. We don't need a king or queen, and that was the idea of it. And the most revolutionary concept they came up with was the consent to the governed. No other nation had done that before. So, we're going to, in most other countries, it was by royal decree. You listened to the king or you didn't. But in America, this was no, these you have a right to be governed by those that you consent to have you governed. So, that's why it's when we look at something like later on during the Civil War, that's why there's a big dichotomy between what happened then and what happened in the Civil War, because clearly in 1860 there were people, what it can be 13 states who no longer consented. So it kind of made a mockery of what we were, because we were founded on the consent of the governed. And now, I don't know how many millions we're looking at secession now. You've got probably between the red and blue states, how many millions of people don't want to live with, the other 70 or 80 million? Well, lots of us. And so we're not consenting anymore. So, and I'm not sure what will happen out of that, because we've never had the kind of division that we have now in anywhere. And certainly during the Civil War, you had basic foundational issues that everyone agreed on. God, for instance, now we don't have anything like that. We don't have any type of foundational issue. So I don't think what happened in 1776 would be remotely possible today. And people always need to remember as well that that revolution was led by the one percenters of their day. These people, John Hancock, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, they were like the Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos of the day. So I certainly can't imagine the one percenters that we are. Now they're the villains of our day to most of us. But I don't think the war for independence would have been possible, because most people are followers, and I don't think they would have had the wherewithal or even the desire to lead a revolution by themselves. But we had the people of influence that basically sparked this. And then you had Thomas Paine, another rich guy who wrote Common Sense, which was just a little 48-page pamphlet, but it had a huge impact on the public.
The population back then during this revolution, they ended up coming together after the revolution, but we were divided during it as well. Obviously, as you well know, there were loyalists, there were revolutionaries, there were people who kind of sat the thing out. How in the world did we come together after that?
Well, it's a good question. And one of the most notable examples would be, everybody remembers that they've seen the picture, the painting of Benjamin Franklin with his little son, flying the kite, and being hit by lightning. And that little boy ended up being a loyalist. And Benjamin Franklin, and that was probably the most notable schism from the revolution. They never talked to each other for the rest of their lives. Very, very sad case. But I think, again, people had there were certainly people. You had Federalists, and at the beginning of the Republic, the great issue of the day, one of the great issues was the central bank, which later we look at the Federal Reserve and things like that. It culminated in that. And obviously, the other side won. The Federalists won. But at the time, you had people like Jefferson and Madison and Patrick Henry before he died, people like that were arguing against that. And that was a crucial issue. But it wasn't so much as it wasn't a deal breaker. So you had people like Jefferson and Adams, who had one of the most contentious presidential campaigns of all time, 1800, who later became, wrote some of the greatest letters in the history of correspondence. I mean, people still treasure the letters between Jefferson and Adams for the next 25 years or so. They both lived into old age, but they were able to bury their differences. So I think the differences were small back then, and because they believed in the consent of the governed. Now, I don't know how many of them took it to the degree that Thomas Jefferson did, but especially in this age of people talking about insurrection and what happened with the January 6th and all that, when you look at the wording of the Declaration of Independence, what Jefferson notably said, anytime the people grow weary or dissatisfied with the government they have every right to alter it or abolish it. Now, I don't think there's a leader in America today that would agree with that. They would say, well, yeah, you do have the right to alter or abolish it. I mean, what leader would possibly say that? Maybe Thomas Massey. I don't know. But I don't know of anybody else. And so it's a great thing. And again, it's something revolutionary, because the idea was that you have to, so if you don't consent, and right now, I suspect you're on my side. There's 70 or 80 million of us that don't consent to, the tyranny, the degree of tyranny that we're being subjected to. We don't, I mean, and no taxation without representation. And that was invented by a guy named James Otis, who's been completely forgotten, and went out in classic conspiratorial style, where he was struck by lightning as he was standing in a doorway and died that way. But he's the one who invented the taxation without no taxation without representation. But that's very important now, because most of us look at it as, what are we being taxed for? And we look at what are we getting back in terms for it. The USAID disclosure certainly showed just a very minute bit of the fraud that's going on. we have no idea what we're financing, but I do know I live in one of the richest counties in the United States, and congressmen live here, U.S. press corps. I drive out and there are potholes everywhere. The infrastructure is a joke. The power grid's here. So what exactly are we paying for? And yet we always have money for Ukraine or Israel or any kind of whatever needs to be done in that direction, or the next congressional pay raise. So so many people are dissatisfied with that, but that's why it gets to the core. If this really is a government by consent, then there's many millions of us, but we can't secede. I mean, what would happen if everybody that voted for Donald Trump and then some decided, well, we're going to form our own country? I mean, I guess you would have, something that would make the Civil War pale by comparison, because I don't think they would let us leave peacefully.
No, I don't think they would either. So why don't we change it? Why don't the American people march to the polls? All of the House of Representatives can be removed every 2 years. Everybody knows this, but we don't.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, and that's a good question. And I've talked about this all the time, that Congress has, I think, about a 5% approval rate in polls, and yet the average reelection rate is like 96%. So I mean, I don't know how to explain that. How do we make that make sense? But I mean, how does Lindsey Graham or Chuck Schumer, or how did Nancy Pelosi, how do these people possibly get reelected? I don't know. I mean, I can't conceive of anybody that would elect these people. So that's of course where you get people, and we saw it during 2020 with the vote fraud that was so transparent in 2020, is that so many people believe that your vote doesn't count. Because either way, it's a terrible prospect to consider. If the votes count, then you have to say that somehow, especially on the Republican side, Republicans are reelecting these people for whatever reason. You've had MAGA candidates and good people that challenge some of these rhinos, and they usually go down to defeat. And but on the other hand, the other possibility is that they're not counting the votes, in which case it makes no sense to even attempt to vote. So it's a good question. This is why where we are right now in the Trump administration 2.0, with all the promises made, and we have people in place there, that we should start seeing some changes. And that's why it's so disappointing when you have somebody like Kash Patel, who makes a comment like Epstein killed himself, and Dan Bongino basically backing him up when you get recordings of Dan Bongino questioning it. That's where people get so jaded, and why people get so cynical, because we have people in here that most people applauded. I mean, RFK Jr. is a personal hero of mine. I still don't know for sure what he's doing. I think he's doing some good things, but I don't know. I hear from the alt media that he's not. I really don't know. So we have to look at what's actually being accomplished. I thought Doge was a great idea, and it was wonderful. But why is it stopped? I mean, they were supposed to audit the Pentagon. Let's audit the CIA. Let's audit the Federal Reserve. Imagine what we'll find there. But now that Elon Musk is feuding with Trump, that kind of seems to have been halted. And even the disclosures from USAID, you had millions of Americans who were upset at it. No, don't tell us about the fraud. I mean, I had people that were friends of mine who have Trump derangement syndrome, and they literally argue with me that they didn't believe there was fraud in government. I said, really, this surprises you? You actually thought that there was no fraud in government? And it was a drop in the bucket. I can't imagine what the Federal Reserve would show, or the CIA, or these bigger agencies, the Pentagon itself. But so I think that would be a start. But again, it's a question of we have to all be on the same page. And I think the problem is that millions of us disagree with other millions about what the problem is. I mean, there are millions of people out there that are okay with, transgender surgery for elementary school students. I can't ever possibly reason with somebody like that. I can't discuss that rationally. And there's millions
Yeah.
more like me. So how do you possibly live in the same culture with someone like that?
Yeah, it's tough. Donald, that was awesome. Appreciate you, sir. All right. We're going to talk some more about the American Revolution. I promise. Next. Give me liberty or give me death. Everybody knows that quote. Everybody knows that quote. Even America haters know that quote. It's got a real John Wayne feel to it. So What was it about? Why did it last so long? Let's talk to somebody who knows a little bit of something about all this stuff. William J. Federer, author of a wonderful book called American Minute. William, what's that quote? What's that speech all about? What was happening?
Yeah, well, that was Patrick Henry, and he gave that to rally the colonies to declare independence against the King of England. So the King of England was a globalist. He was a one world government guy. Matter of fact, the default setting for human government is gangs. And a gang leader with enough weapons we call a king. And from the Nimrod, Tower of Babel, to Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, until the kingdoms keep getting bigger because with the latest military advancement, kings can kill more people. Until finally, at the time of the Revolution, the King of England was the most powerful king. The sun never set on the British Empire. He had India, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, British Guyana, Canada, Barbados, Bermuda, Jamaica, and America. And America's founders decided they didn't like a globalist king telling us what to do, so they broke away and flipped it and made the people the king. So the colonies had Patrick Henry. He was the five-time governor of Virginia. He was the most popular attorney in Virginia. And he was rallying the country. He said that the king is bringing armies of soldiers over here. And why? There's no threat from France or the Dutch or the Spanish. Why would he be doing it other than to subjugate us? And he goes on to say that I can hear the chains clanging to enslave us. And he was a powerful speaker. His dad was as an Anglican, but his mom was a Presbyterian. And at the time, the Presbyterians were known as the resistance denomination to the king. They were mostly from Scotland. And so in Virginia was a Scottish Presbyterian preacher named Samuel Davies. And Patrick Henry credits him with learning how to give speeches and stir people's hearts. And so matter of fact, whenever they would go, he'd go with his mom. His mom would have him recite the speech to him on the carriage on the way back from the church. So his first legal case was the Parsons Cause. So in Virginia, you had Anglicans, and the Anglicans were paid by the state actually with tobacco because they were tobacco farmers, and they had a poor crop and they couldn't pay it. Yet the Anglican ministers still wanted to get paid the same, so they appealed to the king, and the king said they get paid the same. And so Patrick Henry is there. He says, the Bible says you're supposed to take care of the orphan and the widow, but you're making orphans and widows by forcing them to sell their family farm to pay you to, and he like lays into them. And so they vote to give an award of $1, the equivalent to these Anglican parsons, but they lifted up Patrick Henry on their shoulders. He was like a hero to them. But that was the first time that he came out against something the king had done. And so he was not afraid of speaking out and stirring up the sentiment. The situation in the colonies was the 1770 Bengal famine. The British East India Company took over Bengal, and they rearranged their economy to grow profitable crops. And they didn't realize that they were messing up the way they had done stuff for centuries. And when a famine came, 10 million people died. There were streets, 10,000 a day were dying of this famine, and dogs running around with human body parts. I mean, it was horrible. And so the British East India Company is on the verge of bankruptcy. So they appealed to the King of England for a corporate bailout, right? The government bailing out corporations. So the king said, okay, you can tax England with your tea and raise the price of it. But the people of England didn't want the taxes. So the king says, okay, you can tax the colonies, and you can cut out the middlemen, and you can go in there and we can make sure no other countries can smuggle stuff into the colonies, and we can take away the colonies' right to have their own currency. And we're going to have the judges be appointed by the king rather than locally, so that you won't get justice if you buck the king. And then we're going to have the Stamp Act. Every single piece of paper, credit cards, playing cards, and wedding licenses, and everything had to have a king's stamp on it. And And Ben Franklin goes to England and says, there's no way you can even collect the tax. It's a rural country. And then they pass the writs of assistance. This allows the government to read everybody's emails. Now, they didn't have email back then, but your letters. So the government could rifle through everybody's letters and read it. And they could confiscate all your possessions, your farm, just on a suspicion of you being disloyal to the king. And then they quartered in your houses. All right. So they left over troops from the French and Indian War, and they would come up to your house and they would sleep in your beds and eat in your kitchen, and you'd have to live in the attic. And so one by one, they kept tightening the screws and confiscating ships. And so you had a Boston Tea Party and 342 chests of tea. Well, the king didn't like it, so he decided to blockade Boston's harbor on June 1st, 1775. Means no business in and out. We're gonna grind your economy to a halt. So Thomas Jefferson is in Virginia, and he writes a day of fasting and prayer, introduces it in the Virginia legislature to be observed June 1st, 1774, the same day the Boston harbor is being blockaded. George Washington writes in his diary, went to church, fasted all day. And so the royal governor considers this a veiled threat to the king, so he disbands their House of Burgesses. The legislators go down the street to Raleigh Tavern. In the back room, they plot to have a Continental Congress. And then a couple months later, they have the first Continental Congress. And they're from all the different colonies. And you had Anglicans and Congregationalists and Presbyterians and Baptists and Lutherans and Dutch Reformed and one Catholic. And there was a motion to open with prayer. And one denomination didn't want to hear prayer from another denomination, but Sam Adams stands up and he says, I'm no bigot. I can hear a prayer of any man of piety who at the same time is a patriot of our country. And so they have the first Continental Congress, and then the next year they have the second Continental Congress. But that's when Patrick Henry gives his famous speech, give me liberty, give me death. It's like, okay, because you had certain ones like John Dickinson, Olive Branch petition. He's like, oh, let's apologize to the king one more time. Let's try to patch it up. And Patrick Henry was like, there's no more patching it up.
William, it almost seems, to hear you lay it out, it almost seems as if they wanted a revolution, just poking people in the ribs and poking them in the ribs and poking them in the ribs. And I understand the sun never set on the British Empire, but even for a king, how could you be that arrogant to not see a revolution coming?
Well, he was 38 years old, King George III, and he had porphyria, a blue blood disease, where if you intermarry to keep the royal blood, after a while you've intermarried too much. And after the revolution, seriously, after the revolution, they put King George III in a royal insane asylum. And he gets out and he's giving his speech and he says, my lords and my peacocks, because the ladies had the fancy hats with the feathers, and they realized he still wasn't. So they put him back in the royal insane asylum, and the Duke of Windsor took over running England in his place. And so they try to say that it really got bad after the revolution, but I don't think he was playing with a full deck of cards the whole time. But sort of like, God hardened Pharaoh's heart because he wanted Israel to break away. In a sense, maybe he was belligerent on purpose because God wanted America to become free.
It sounds like the Christian faith played a significant role in the revolution, but I don't want to overstate that. Did it, or was it just something that was alongside the revolution?
Right. So we have to realize that in Europe, it was Catholic, and then the Reformation, and every country had its own denomination. Northern Germany and Sweden were Lutheran, Switzerland, Calvinist, Scotland, Presbyterian, Holland, Dutch Reformed, and they didn't get along. And so they were chasing people out of each other's countries. Well, those were the displaced people that spilled over and founded colonies in America. So every colony was started by a different Christian denomination. Virginia was Anglican. Massachusetts was Puritan. Rhode Island was Baptist. Maryland was Catholic. Pennsylvania Quaker. Connecticut, New Hampshire Congregationalists. New York Dutch Reformed. Delaware, New Jersey were Swedish Lutheran. And they didn't get along, and they would tar and feather each other. But then they all had to work together against the king. After the revolution, their attitude was, we may not always agree on religion, but you were willing to fight and die for my freedom. But when you realize it, the same states that sent representatives to do the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, in 1776, 9 of the states required their representatives to be Protestant. 3, all you had to do was be a plain Christian, right? And so Delaware's 1776 state constitution said every office holder had to make a declaration of belief in God, Jesus Christ, his only Son, the Holy Ghost, one God, blessed forevermore. I mean, that was Delaware. So Ben Franklin signed Pennsylvania's Constitution in 1776, which said every office holder had to believe in God, the creator and governor of the universe, the rewarder of the good, the punisher of the wicked, and acknowledge the scriptures of the Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration. Right? So you not only had to lay your hand on a Bible, you had to swear you believed in the Bible. But these were the states that sent the representatives to do the Declaration and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and so one little trivia: the Second Continental Congress does the Declaration of Independence. Just 2 months before that, May of 1776. The Continental Congress unanimously passes a day of fasting and prayer to Almighty God through the merits and mediation of Jesus Christ. And they give a copy to Washington, and he orders his troops to observe this day of fasting and prayer. And then Washington appoints chaplains to every regiment. And so you look at the Revolution. My wife and I put together a book called Miracles in American History. The Battle of Brooklyn Heights. The British find a loyalist to lead 10,000 troops through Jamaica Pass in New York and attack George Washington from behind on August 27, 1776. 3,000 Americans are killed, only 300 British. And then Washington is pinned up against the water, the sun goes down, and he's trying to ferry his troops across. But the sun starts to come up, and he only moved half the troops. And so his chief of intelligence, Major Ben Talmadge, describes a fog that settled and blocked it so that you couldn't see a man at 6 yards distance. And then Washington's able to remove all the rest of the troops. And then the fog lifts and the British charge, nobody's there. I mean, there's miracle after miracle that allowed us to break away from the most powerful military force in the world and create a country where we, the people, are in charge, government from the consent of the governed.
That's wonderful. William, thank you so much for that. I appreciate you very much. Final thoughts. Next. I love this country. I know you love this country. Just know this. Just quick final thought. We are blessed by God to have this opportunity to live here, to be born here, to die here. And I am so grateful for it. And I'm grateful for the men who fought the most powerful empire on the planet so you and I can live free. We'll do it again. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.